Welcome to the Dr. Broadway Podcast, the musical theater history podcast where a couple of doctors sit around and talk about Broadway. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kristin Stultz Pressley, joined as always by Dr. Tracey Brent-Chessum. Tracey, it feels like we're getting through this Tony's on Tour list pretty quickly. Where are we?
We're in our 8th show-specific episode, so our 8th Tony on tour, and this is Dear Evan Hansen, which wins the Best Musical Tony Award in 2017. It opens in 2016 on Broadway.
That's right. Yeah, sometimes there's some tricky, we've addressed this, but the dates can be a little bit tricky where you open in one year and then because of the way the award season is structured, you're not awarded until the following year. So it can get confusing when you're dealing with these. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's like all of the year prior. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
It's a different way of thinking about it. And I'm, when I teach it, I always teach the day that it opened. So I know all the dates and I'm always like, wait a minute, oh no, we're talking about the Best Musical Award. Okay.
I know. It is very tricky. It's hard to keep track of, but if you're not familiar with the way the theater season works in New York, it is kind of follows a school schedule, basically, right? So it's kind of, late summer to early spring-ish would be eligible for the Tony Awards in 1 year. And it just depends on where you open, where you're going to be eligible. So Dear Evan Hansen opened in December of 2016 and then is eligible for the 2017 awards. It's a whole thing, but let me tell you, it gets even more confusing with Moulin Rouge, which opens in 2019, but then because of the pandemic, doesn't get a Tony Award until 2021. That one is very difficult for me to get my mind around.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be, but it involves numbers.
It's going to mess up a lot of people.
Hey, yours truly, including yours truly.
It messed me up when I was looking through the notes for this episode, and it says that it closed in 2022. And I'm like, no, it didn't. It closed like right after I saw it. I went, oh no, pandemic. It shut down and then reopened and then shut down.
That's right. Yeah. It and we'll get to this, but it didn't run for as long as I thought it might. I don't know why that is. I guess it's just expense, right? And pandemic. Yeah,
it's pandemic.
People weren't going back. That's right. That's right. And it got Come From Away as well.
Yeah,
which was the same Broadway season. And gosh. And that's one of those things that we have alluded to in this podcast multiple times, the pandemic. But truly, we can't even assess the impact of the pandemic other than to say, we know that multiple shows, Dear Evan Hansen being one of them, closed early because even after they reopened post-pandemic, people were still uncomfortable with going to the theater. So ticket sales weren't what they needed to be. But beyond that, we aren't far enough away to be able to look back as historians and really assess the fallout. But it was massive.
I mean, we lost a generation of new talent too.
Right.
I always come back to that because I watched all my seniors graduate from a top 10 musical theater school, and most of them are not doing anything because
can you imagine
it hit just at the wrong time. And so now they're doing other great things in the art world or tangential to the art world, but there's a lot. I think we're going to get a lot on the damage to performers, to people who want to work in the industry, mostly because my favorite part of the pandemic was the fact that theater shut completely down. Everyone was out of work. And then we're still seeing the fallout where parents are like, no, when bad things happen, they shut art down. Like, this is not a viable thing for you. I'm not going to pay for you to go to school to learn something when you're not going to be able to pay your student loans because they're going to shut it down. It's a lot. So.
Right. And thinking of it from the other perspective too, Tracey's thinking she's a professor. She talks to students all the time. So she's thinking about her students who weren't able to get jobs. But then you've got people who were already in New York or in LA or wherever they may have been, Chicago, wherever they may have been working as full-time actors. And, they can't afford to stay there when the work dries up.
Yeah.
And the work dries up for 18 months and they've got to move home or they've got to move. A lot of them, I feel like, moved to Nashville. I feel like there's a lot of them and Atlanta too.
And a lot of them, you're right, a lot of them moved home. And shout out to those parents too. Like, thank you for being the safety net in in a worldwide like bit of trauma because
Yeah.
no one saw that coming. No one could prepare for how long it was. All these people are like, well, somebody said to me once, like, people should have had a 6 month, emergency
Nest egg.
savings,
Yeah. Right.
like, and everything. And I went, yeah. And after those 6 months, then what? Because
Right.
remember,
'Cause-
we were shut down for almost 2 years, and they were
Right.
like, oh, I'm like, yeah. Lots of people did have the 6 months, and then they were like, oh, I gotta get out of here.
That's right. I
So-
can't keep doing this. I can't keep doing this. And so, a lot of people left the industry altogether because they had to take jobs in other places to just support themselves. And so it will be interesting to see how that all shakes out. Do we see people coming back after a time to the industry? Did the people who left the industry, did they suddenly plug into community theaters and regional theaters? We just don't know yet. And so that's why, as historians, there is so much benefit of hindsight because we need a bird's eye view to be able to see exactly what the fallout of these things is. I will say that very early on when things were shutting down, what I said to my friends was, the thing that scares me most is the precedent that this sets. Like, are we going to do this again? And if we've done it once, the precedent is set, And so it's interesting. We need to take stock and see what we can learn and, what were the right choices that were made and what were the wrong choices that were made and see how we can prevent kind of an implosion of an industry from happening again. But we're too close to, ground zero for that at the moment.
Yeah.
Boy, that was a rabbit trail I did not intend to go down.
I did not see that one coming. I think more and more though, like when we talk about, the shows from the last 5-6 years, the pandemic, we can't not talk about it.
Right.
Also because, I think we all, no matter what our feelings about it, no matter how we viewed it, there's a little bit of trauma in
question for
what
all
we
of
all
us.
went through in that, even though we were all sitting on our butts at home.
Right.
Most of us.
And clearly we made it through, right? We have so much to be thankful for. But yeah, we were all impacted in so many different ways, and we just can't probably fully articulate them. I remember doing a study when I was in graduate school on plays of war. And what I found and what I found in doing that study was it tended to be at least 20 years after something happened before writers were really talking about it.
Yeah.
And they needed that time to decompress and understand what had happened so that they could write about it articulately. And so we're still in that. It's remarkable to think we're 5 years out, but we're still, it's
but
like
you're
it just
looking at
happened.
the episodes that we've done, 2011, Book of Mormon, 2015, Hamilton. Now we're doing Dear Evan Hansen. We're doing the same thing going, here's some information about it, but we don't have a clear view of what this is doing right now. So we're giving you the information that we have around it, and maybe we'll, start forming some more historical opinions later. But like, really, in the meantime, what are we doing? In those 20 years, we sit back and we process with our mouths, as my mom would say, right?
I think it's clear that's what we do, Tracey.
Well, it is what we do, but that's what everybody does with war, with any sort of like mass trauma. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about it in relationship to all these different things. And only then are we able to kind of sit down and write about it with a little bit more specificity. So.
Yeah. And I think that is, though it is kind of an unusual tangent for us to go on at the top of this episode, I still think it's important because, like you said, particularly the next 3 episodes, as we complete this Tony's on Tour series in the next couple of weeks, all of these shows are going to be impacted by the same thing. So we really could cut and paste, though we won't, but we could cut and paste this conversation and put it at the top of every one of these shows, because certainly every one of them was impacted. Yeah. So having said that, let's talk about Dear Evan Hansen. Finally, 15 minutes in, I think. So 15 minutes in, let's talk about Dear Evan Hansen. Now, any conversation, obviously, that we're going to have about Dear Evan Hansen has to start with its creators, Benj Pasek and Justin Paul. If you hear me pause before I say their names, I always I always like say it to myself first to be sure that I'm getting each name lined up with the, I want to match
I
up the
never get
pairs
it
correctly.
right ever.
Yeah,
I don't know
well,
why. It's awful. So I'm
I don't
always
know
just
why
like
it's so difficult, but
Pasek
I
and
struggle with
Paul.
it
We'll
too.
just say Pasek and Paul.
Right. Pasek and Paul. So, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned that because they go by Pasek and Paul. It's a very diplomatic reason. It's alphabetical. Their names are alphabetical. And as they were beginning to pick up some success and it was clear that they were going to be a big thing, you think Rodgers and Hammerstein, Lerner
Hmm.
and Lowe, Rodgers and Hart. You got to figure out how you're going to work this. And they just decided to be very diplomatic and go with the alphabetical listing of their names. But I was looking at them and they're real close. I mean, they're real close.
Hmm.
So, at any rate, let's talk about Pasek and Paul. And the Pasek of Pasek and Paul is Benj Pasek, who grew up in Philadelphia and was, not surprisingly, he was into music, into theater, into arts, into all of those things. And something significant happened to him while he was in high school at the Friends Select High School in Philly. And he remembered it throughout his early life, young life. But what happened was a student at his high school died. And when that happened, he remembers, even as just a teenager, he remembers how people tried to insert themselves into the tragedy.
Hmm.
By which I mean, they would write their high school essays or college entrance essays about what this student meant to them. And even
Like,
at the
I never
time,
talked to him though.
right, right. Even at the time, Benj was like, wait, you didn't know him?
Hmm.
What do you mean? But they all wanted to insert themselves kind of into the front of this tragedy. And of course, that's going to come back thematically later in Pasek's career. But I want to mention that here
Hmm.
because that's kind of the inciting incident for what happens that leads to Dear Evan Hansen.
Yeah.
So I mentioned that happened in high school. And, he says he was even guilty of it himself, where but if you think about it, we have all seen this done. We've probably all done it. When I first read about this and heard Pasek describe it, I immediately thought of when I don't even remember what year it was, when Notre Dame was on fire.
Hmm.
Maybe 2017, 2018. I mean,
Yeah.
it's somewhere around there. And I remember on Facebook, I swear every friend I had who has ever been to Paris posted a picture of themselves. Here's me at Notre Dame 2 years ago, or I was at Notre Dame last week.
Yeah.
Like we do have some sort of weird need to insert ourselves in those kind of position or those situations where we really don't necessarily belong, right?
Hmm.
And so that's what Pasek was impacted by as just a high school kid.
I just want to
And it's
make
important
just
to remember.
yeah, I just want to make a comment here that I think this is different based upon the generations. And I know we're going
Okay.
to talk about this later. When I was in high school, when I was in the ninth grade, I was a freshman in high school. My our biology teacher had a brain aneurysm and died.
Wow.
And I remember a lot of discussion about, oh gosh, I didn't, I didn't like him. He was really like hard in class.
Right.
And I was always so frustrated. And now I'm really sad that I didn't really get to know him and that kind of thing. The difference between the two, I don't remember feeling like people were inserting themselves into
Mm-hmm.
the moment. I felt like people were really kind of grappling with their own sense of um, mortality in those
Sure.
moments. But because we did not have social media, we didn't need to perform it in the
That's right. There
same
was no
way.
public display of
There was,
grief.
yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
public display of grief was like in our classrooms when we had to go to class and there was no teacher there, and
Right.
they had the counselor come in because we were like, we know he has a son that's our age. Is he okay? Like, what
Yeah.
can we do? We don't. What do you do at these moments? And having
Right.
to have adults help us through that. That doesn't happen anymore, does it?
Right. Right. That's a great point. That's a great point. And social media certainly is going to enter into this conversation
Yeah.
because I do think you're right. There is a performance aspect now to our lives. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's the reason why, if you think back gosh, this is another rabbit trail, but I'll make it quick. But if you think back to our lives as kids and teenagers, what do you have? 15 pictures of high school years,
No.
Whereas now,
I went
and
back
granted,
and tried to digitize all of them so they look grainy
yes,
and gross too.
yes,
So
right. But now, granted, they all have phones with cameras attached to them, so that makes a big difference. We certainly didn't have that, but they have 15 pictures of themselves getting ready for school this morning,
Yeah.
right? There is so much more. They're performing constantly, whether or not they realize it.
Yeah.
So that's a great point, and one that we'll come back to, I would imagine, when we're talking about the social media aspect,
Yeah.
which certainly, Stacey Mendich, the producer of Dear Evan Hansen, calls social media the 9th character in this 8-character show. So it's
totally true.
yeah, very important piece of the puzzle. Okay, so that's Benj Pasek. Justin Paul grows up not back to the matter at hand.
And yeah, sorry. Guys.
Again, no. I think that's a great point. But Justin Paul grew up not too far away from Philly in Connecticut. So they're both Northeastern fellas. He was the son of a pastor, grew up, of course, singing in church, but also singing wherever he could sing, right? Just like Pasek very much. Very involved in music, very interested in the arts and all of those things that go with it. And these two guys meet the summer before their freshman year at the University of Michigan.
I want to make a point here. As somebody who has taught and recruited for a top 10 most represented on Broadway program, Michigan takes about 3%, I think, of the people who audition.
Yeah.
We offered admission to, I think, 10%, 9%. But 3%. Michigan is a huge program.
Yeah.
They are good performers.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we give them that, that people understand that they're going to one of the top 3 schools for musical theater and can get in. They beat out lots of people to do this.
That's a great point. And one that I would have brushed over because I take it for granted. But it's not just that Michigan is good now. It's been good for a long time.
It's been good for a long time, yeah.
It's been good for a long time. And Tracey, are you comfortable talking about the school where you were? I mean, just mentioning where you were. Is that?
Oh, yeah. No, I taught at Point Park University.
Okay. Yeah. So,
yes. And I mean, I'm so proud of the students that I got to work with there. A lot of them, if you know anything about Point Park, it comes out of the dance program too. So I've got my musical theater kids who have all done amazing things, but also these dance kiddos that came through and did a minor in musical theater, and they are some of the hardest working kids I've ever seen, and they get booked a lot. And I'm super proud to see them using those skills. So
yeah. And as you're reading through bios in playbills before a show or at intermission, whenever you do that, you'll often see Point Park University come up. So that's another one of those great programs. But Tracey's absolutely right. Michigan has historically been just one of the Mac daddies in musical theater development.
And Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
so that's what, yeah, absolutely. So these two guys meet the summer, they have that orientation program the summer before everybody comes in. That's where they meet, they connect, they go into school at Michigan knowing each other because of that. And then they connect again in ballet class where they were both, they considered themselves the worst students in the ballet class, just not dancers, just, we've all been there. I know I have.
But it just cracks me up. It's you're in the top 3%, of people who audition for this program, you are the worst people in ballet. But hey, you know what? Let's talk about the relativity here.
Yes, right. Very fair point.
The amount of times I've said that to a student, I'm like, yes, you suck at ballet.
But look at where you are.
Look at what you got into. Look at these 3 schools you got into. Everybody calm down. You have something to offer.
Well, and even when you listen, if you go to YouTube and listen to Theater Talk, which is a great program historically, where you have some journalists who will interview creators of theater. If you listen to the episode on Dear Evan Hansen, you hear Benj Pasek singing these songs, and you're like, why didn't he play in Evan Hansen? He's so talented.
Very good. They're very
That's an
talented.
excellent point. But in spite of that, I guess because there was so much competition, they found themselves, particularly their freshman year, not getting cast in the roles that they
Oh
wanted
no,
to be cast in, right? They're not
no.
getting the lead roles. They want to be,
As freshmen.
right.
Y'all, that doesn't
Right.
happen. We
Well,
do
and I
that. I'm
imagine
sorry, we do that on purpose. Because you've gotten all of the parts up in town now, and we need some reality checks.
That's
So,
right. Exactly. That's exactly it. I mean, it's like an athlete who goes from being the star in his high school to
yes.
riding the bench in college, but it's because, there may not have been much competition in high school, but in college, guess what? You got some
One of the
competition.
top two school. Yes,
Right,
yes.
right. So, at any rate, they're frustrated by this. And so they decide, you know what? We're not getting cast in anything. Let's just write our own stuff. And so they start writing music on their own. And they write about, it's really interesting the time when they're doing this because they're writing about issues that their generation is facing. And one of those big issues is this growing, I mean, it's in its infancy, so it's very new, but social media. One of
Hmm.
those things being Facebook. And Facebook, if you remember, when it first came out around 2005, I believe, it was only for college students. It
Yeah.
wasn't used by your grandmother like it is today.
You had
It
to have
was,
an .edu
that's
um,
right.
email address in order to
That's
use
right.
it.
That's
Yeah.
right. And so they would write their songs and post it to what was called at the time the Facebook. And as a result of that, they may not have been being cast in shows at the University of Michigan, but there were students across the country who were hearing their music and resonating with them because it was written about the life that kids of that era were living.
Hmm.
And so they start performing them as part of their own recitals, as part of their own open mic nights. So Pasek and Paul, who can't get a role front and center at Michigan, nevertheless have this pretty significant online following,
Yeah.
right? And it all starts because of their own frustration at not getting cast how they wanted to be, and then writing their own music about the experience of being a college student in the, mid aughts, I guess you would
Yeah.
call it. And how do we grapple with this new online identity thing that we're all having to create for ourselves? How does that differ from our real-time identity and all of those things? And so one of the most eventually they had enough music that they developed a song cycle called Edges.
Hmm.
And if you're not familiar with Edges, I encourage you to go check it out on YouTube because there are some great songs. And like I said, it's been performed so much now that it's readily available. But they have one number about the Facebook, and I'll try to put some of it on our social media when this episode goes live, because I love to share this when I speak about Dear Evan Hansen. I love to share this number of the Facebook because
Hmm.
it is hilarious and spot on and so insightful. And you think, how did they pick that up
And this is
so early in
way
that era?
before, yeah, and this
Oh,
is way
yeah.
before Facebook even takes off, that they're like,
Right.
ooh,
And
yeah.
they just nail it. They nail it. So that was part of the recipe for their success, was really just building this online following as writers. All right. So then the next big piece of the puzzle comes in the summer of 2005 when Pasek interns for Jeff Marks, who was the co-creator of Avenue Q. We talked about Bobby Lopez, who was another co-creator of Avenue Q when we talked about Book of Mormon. But Avenue Q wins Best Musical Tony Award in 2004.
Mhm.
I'm hoping that date is correct because I know when it premiered and I'm trying to think through. I believe it was the '04, but it might have been the '05 Best Musical. Again, see our earlier conversation about dates. Anyway, Martin is so confusing. I have to always check to be sure. And I did not check on that one. But Marks is also a Michigan alum, so he's keen to help his fellow Wolverine, and Pasek interns for him. Well, the following summer, Pasek wants to intern for him again, but Marks has seen in him enough talent that he says, mm-mm, this is not where you need to be. You need to be working full time with your buddy, Justin Paul, right? You guys need to be writing. There's really nothing I can help you with. Go do your thing, right? You got it. You got it. Well, the problem was Justin Paul needed to work to earn money to pay for school, right? He could not.
Michigan is
uh,
expensive, y'all.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think any out of state school, well, even
All
in state
all
now, but
all of it is too expensive.
yes,
All of it is
yes,
ridiculous. But this, yeah,
yeah.
it's expensive. So,
Yeah. So Paul is like, I wish I could work full time, but I'm not there yet. I got to have a job. So Marks says, okay, I'm going to pay you $7,000 for the summer so that you can just write. And Justin Paul says, I will not take your money, and bless him for it. But Marks brilliantly then reframes it. And he says, no, 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 no. It's not a handout. It's a bet.
hmm
I bet you that
hmm
you will be on Broadway in 10 years. And if you're not, then you pay me $7,000. But if you are, I mean, like, it is brilliant the way that he
yeah,
reframes it.
he just
And
reframed
then,
it to make it,
yeah, he
yeah.
just reframed it. I mean, the guy had written a Best Musical Tony Award winner. He can afford $7,000 to help this kid who he knows is going to be a huge success, right?
Well, it's also, I think, for the parents who are going, wait, what happened?
Right.
You're not getting a job? Who gave you $7,000? Who is this man?
Right.
You know,
What does he want from you, right?
yeah, exactly. It's a little,
Yeah.
it's, watching that change.
Yeah.
For me, I think I feel a little better when it's like, you only have to repay it if you do
Yes.
this, that, and the other thing. So that it's
Yes.
kind of like this person actually sees talent
Something.
in this
Yeah.
and really wants him to do this. It's not like he wants him near him. So he's like,
Exactly. Exactly. It was definitely all above board. It was all
Yeah.
above board. Yeah. So, that was Justin Paul agrees. He takes the money, they write full time, and then things happen very quickly for them, right? And like I said, 2000, they've written this song cycle rather, called Edges. It premieres in Ann Arbor in 2005. Within a couple of years, there are productions, I mean, literally hundreds of productions of this song cycle worldwide. It is not just on college campuses, but it is everywhere now. It has spread like wildfire. Then in 2006, they do a song cycle in New York City with cast that includes Gavin Creel and Jesse Tyler Ferguson and Celia Keenan Bolger. I mean, they have just in 2006 graduated from Michigan. So that's how young these guys are, right? This kind of story is it's very Richard Rodgers-y, right? Because Rodgers had that much success that early on, but it doesn't happen often, certainly not this day and age. Excuse me. So they 2006, they have the song cycle off Broadway. Then they start writing a number of children's musicals, including an adaptation of Roald Dahl's James and the Giant Peach, which they work at Goodspeed, which we talked about in our Annie episode in Connecticut. They worked with Goodspeed in 2010 to develop that. And then they continued writing some children's stuff, like If You Give a Pig a Pancake and Duck for President. If you have children, you may recognize those as book titles that you've read.
I read the pig a pancake,
You may
read
recognize this.
Read pig a pancake.
Well, maybe if you can find a recording, you can just hit play.
I know we can just hit play. I didn't know it was a musical.
Right. That's right. That's right. That's right. So they also wrote for some TV shows like Johnny and the Sprites, which was a Disney Channel show. Sutton Foster was on it, and maybe John Leguizamo. I might be wrong about that. I'm remembering watching it with my sister's children, and I remember Sutton Foster, but
That's who I remember.
I remember her.
Who she was.
I remember her, and I think John Leguizamo, but I could be completely wrong. So please don't hold me to that. And then Smash, they wrote some music for Smash, the NBC TV show, the second season. They wrote some music for that. Of course, that now is its Broadway musical in its own right. They did not write the music for the Broadway musical, but they did write some for the television show. So then they start working off Broadway, and they develop a musical called Dogfight, which was based on a 1991 movie which starred Lily Taylor and River Phoenix. Do you know this film? I'd never heard of it.
I'd never heard of the film. I know the show.
Yeah. So. See, I don't know the show. What can you tell me about the show? It's brand new to me.
Dogfight is interesting because obviously it's set against the backdrop of I believe it's the Vietnam War, where it's like essentially only the guys that go get a parade when they come home.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. So there are a whole bunch of, young kiddos who are about to ship out to Vietnam, and their last kind of thing is to have a big dance with the girls, etc., and so on. And the dog fight is they've all put in money, and whoever can bring the ugliest girl wins the pot. So then they go out and try to find the ugliest girl they can and bring her back to the thing. And it kind of breaks down, because it's like we get a really nice girl and she's rightfully horrified. And like there are some people who seem to be in the know about what they're doing and some people who are not. And so it's very interesting. And we learn lots of lessons. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. But you got to think they were, 25 when they're writing this. So to tackle a Vietnam, and you're right, I do believe it's Vietnam, to tackle something with those sorts of themes at that age that's difficult.
And I'm not sure. I mean, the 1991 film, I don't know how, obviously I've never seen the film. So I know that, I don't know how closely it parodies, but I remember just being kind of rightfully horrified at this practice, but also like we do this on social media every day.
Well, anyway, that's very fair. Yeah.
Keeping on.
Very fair. Very fair. Now, here's an important plot twist. When they were auditioning for that 2012 Dogfight production off Broadway, two key things happen. One is when they audition a young man who's 18 years old. His name is Ben Platt. And Ben Platt is too young for the role in Dogfight, but they are blown away by him. And they are so blown away by him. Here's this motif of social media recurring, that Benj Pasek goes on Facebook and finds Ben Platt and sends him a message and says, listen, I'm really sorry we can't use you, but you are amazing and you need to know that. Yeah. So that's number one. We'll obviously be coming back to that in a moment. The other thing is, one of the producers who commissioned them to write Dogfight. His name's Stacey Mindich. I've talked about her before. She's the one who said social media is the 9th character in Dear Evan Hansen. Stacey Mindich says to Pasek and Paul as they're working on Dogfight, okay, guys, if there is anything that you could write, your dream project, something that you think no one will ever produce, what would it be? And they immediately knew what they wanted to write. And we'll get back to this in just a moment. But she offered to produce whatever they wanted to write that they thought no one else would produce. I mean, that is a vote of confidence like no other, right?
Yeah.
She was so certain of their skill that she was like, whatever crazy ideas you got, let's roll with it.
Well, and they do have a history of being able to like hit the culture at the right moment. And we were saying this before we started the episode. It's like, I feel like I'm aging out. It's something different. They don't understand what's happening over here, but they do. And so for Stacey to be like, I'm going to take a risk on that. Because even if I'm like, what? Like there's another generation that really gets it. So
Yep. And
very smart.
She recognized that in them. But before we get back to those two big plot twists, keep those in mind, but let me say a few more things and then we'll get back to that. So around the same time that they're writing Dogfight, they get a chance for their Broadway premiere. And guess what? It's less than 10 years after Jeff Marks made that $7,000 bet with Justin Paul. So the Christmas Story is being made into a musical. Of course, the iconic holiday film is being made into a musical. And the songwriter who was attached to that was let go from his responsibilities, relieved of his responsibilities. And so Pasek and Paul are brought in. Now, this was just supposed to be written for a tour, but it ended up transferring to Broadway, and it earned them a nomination for a 2013 Tony Award. Of course, it played Christmas of 2012, but the Tony nomination was 2013. So at opening night of A Christmas Story, Justin Paul goes in with a $7,000 check addressed to Jeff Marks to pay back that bet that he lost.
Yeah.
And what a way to lose, right? What a way to lose. So, of course, not long after this, they're working in films to unbelievable acclaim. Of course, we've got La La Land, The Greatest Showman, things like that, right? We're all familiar with what they've done in film after this. But I want, and we're not, that is outside the purview of this podcast to dig into, but we know La La Land and Greatest Showman. Okay. And we know Greatest Showman, by the way, is coming to Broadway at some point. I don't know how long it'll take to develop, but it's coming. And it'll be awesome, I would imagine.
Yeah.
At any rate, back to those two plot twists when we talked about Dogfight. One was Stacey Mindich saying, "What do you want to write?" And two is auditioning an 18-year-old named Ben Platt. So they knew their dream project. For years since they had met, Pasek and Paul had been discussing Pasek's situation in high school that I mentioned, right? How they were just completely enamored with this notion of people inserting themselves into tragedies that were not their own. And they were very interested in digging into that. They didn't know specifically how. In fact, their approach at it was more satirical initially, like they were making fun of this sort of thing. And we'll get back to how that changed in a moment, but that was the in broad strokes, that was the project that they wanted to tackle. And Mindich said, "Okay, run with it." Okay. Now, let me talk about Ben Platt very briefly. I'm sure many of the people who listen to this podcast are very familiar with him, but for those who are not, let me just give you a quick rundown. Platt grew up in LA, the son of Mark Platt, who was a very big wig at Universal Pictures. He produced films like Legally Blonde, but more notably for Broadway lovers, he was one of the lead producers for Wicked, that Wicked, the musical, right? The Wicked. There's not another Wicked. It's that Wicked. It's this guy. And of course, as you can imagine, he had a big family, several children. They all are very musical, not surprisingly. In fact, as a joke, people would call them the Von Platt family singers.
That's hilarious. That's really good.
Kind of perfect, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of perfect. And his dad recalls Ben asking, like on his 6th birthday, everybody else is asking for video games or whatever. And Ben asked for a clip-on microphone and a fog machine.
Yeah.
So very early.
This is what they do.
Very early, it's clear this kid is a performer, right? And so his parents get him involved in theater pretty early. He plays, he does Winthorpe. I always thought it was Winthrop. Winthrop. Okay, then I always say it wrong. Winthrop in The Music Man opposite Kristin Chenoweth at the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah.
Hollywood Bowl is high cotton, y'all. That is not a community theater by any stretch of the imagination. So he's performing regularly at the Hollywood Bowl. He performs like Patrick in Mame. So that's the nephew character of Auntie Mame. Very important. He tours at age 11 in a brief tour of Caroline or Change by Janine Tesori. He's a performer, right? Yeah. Early on, he's a performer. I love the fact he was also in 4 productions of Guys and Dolls. 3 times he played Sky Masterson, and 1 time he played Nathan Detroit. And in fact, one of those productions was entirely in Hebrew.
Wow.
One of his performances as Sky Masterson. How about that?
Crazy.
So at any rate, he's very gifted as a performer, and that shows from the very, very, very beginning. For college, he decides he's going to come to New York, which makes sense. He wants to be more around stage folk than film folk. And so he's accepted into Columbia for college, but he ends up deferring because he gets cast, ironically, in the Pitch Perfect movie. So he says to Columbia, "I'm coming, but give me a year." And then he films Pitch Perfect, and then in 2012 he goes to Columbia, but he's only there for about 6 weeks because he gets cast as Elder Cunningham in the Chicago production of Book of Mormon. Now, this would also be the same time, around this same period, when he would have auditioned for Pasek and Paul for Dogfight. So
he's 18, like he's just 18, almost 19 when he's anchoring the Book of Mormon, basically. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe, I need to confirm this, but I believe, he did such a great job in the Chicago company that they brought him to New York to play Elder Cunningham. But I may be wrong about that, but I believe I read that. So again, don't quote me on that, but I do believe that's the case. At any rate, after auditioning him for Dogfight and connecting with him on the Facebook, Benj Pasek has made a mental note. This is the guy I'm going to write my Stacey Mindich dream project for, right? So Ben Platt is in his mind as he's developing this show. Okay. So a couple of things that Mindich did as she was bringing this project along, this new dream project, is she hires director Michael Greif, who had famously directed a couple of Pulitzer Prize winners, number one, Rent, and then Next to Normal. And ironically, he had also auditioned Ben Platt for Next to Normal. And he had not cast him, but like Pasek and Paul, he remembered his talent and thought, that's a kid that I could use, right? And so when Pasek and Paul bring Greif in to direct their new project, they mention Ben Platt, and he's like, oh yeah, I know that guy. Let's run with it. So this is who this show is written for. It's with him in mind. The other thing that Mindich does is she brings in a TV and film writer named Stephen Levinson to write the book for Pasek and Paul's new project. Okay. And that ends up being a really, really key component, because Pasek and Paul knew things that they wanted to talk about. They wanted to talk about why people lie, how people present themselves online, how humans respond to tragedy, why, if people are more connected than ever, do they feel so disconnected. So these are some of the big themes that they wanted to talk about. But it was Levinson who said, okay, guys, those are all great, but we can't write themes, right? We need to tell a story. We're not telling themes, we're telling a story. So the creators met together once a week for several months and bounced their ideas off of each other. And here's where I think we should go. And like I said, it was initially very satiric, making fun of people who post their whole lives on Facebook. And we all know those people, and we've all probably made fun of them, right? And that's what the tone was initially. But it was Levinson who said, I don't think that's going to fly. It's not going to work if you're trying to make fun of people. Like that biting sarcasm, satire is not the way we want to go. It was Levinson who posed this question. He said, if we're trying to write a play about connection, then we need to write about someone who would have a very hard time connecting. And that was a key moment of discovery as they were developing this show.
Yeah. I'm always baffled by this. One of the things once the show opened that people were asking about is Evan, this idea of a kiddo that has a hard time of connecting. People started asking almost immediately if Evan is conceived as an autistic character, and to their credit, they all kind of pushed back and said, we're not gonna put a label on this. This is somebody who's having a hard time connecting, and they held that line probably for good reason. It's very, very difficult to accurately portray any sort of neurodivergence, and in some ways mental illness on stage. And if we look at the director's coming from Next to Normal, like,
right,
you get into a lot of trouble with psychologists who are like, this is a stereotype,
right? You're painting with too broad a brush.
Exactly. And you're making a character that is going to then harm the community of people who have this, because you're trying to kind of make this generalized character, and that's not the way it is. Most people will tell you that if you met one person who was neurodiverse, you've met one person who's neurodiverse. You've met one person with autism. That is just one person. You cannot apply what they struggle with to everybody else. Everybody everything in this kind of spectrum, they're all different. And so people really do push back against those kinds of representations. Sometimes, they write it well, and sometimes they write it a little like it becomes a little problematic. I will say that a good portion of the feedback on the character of Evan from the psychology point of view has been less than complimentary. And I say that not because I don't think it works. I think that there is, I don't think they set out to write an autistic character, right? I think they did send out like who is having trouble connecting and why. I think is a big question that they had to answer, and they, you can't kind of embed these things along the way. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there's so much you could unpack here. I think that we'll kind of leave it there. It's just like, one person, right?
Right.
One person, and it's one of the problems that I think comes from this is that the tone of the musical seems to, in some ways, give Evan a pass for the lies that he tells and for the situations he finds himself in, because we are taking that stereotype in our mind and going, oh, he's an autistic character. And I've been told that I need to give this person a pass because X, Y, and Z. And I go, oh, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
This is kind of really awful, like what happens here. Full disclosure, and we had talked about this ahead of time. I am on the autism spectrum. Most people don't know that when they talk to me, except when I tell them, they go, oh, as they start going, oh, I see what's happening. Like the biggest thing that any of our podcast folks that are listening will know is just, I use this, you'll hear me use the same phrase over and over and over and over to get my brain started again. I have a lot of not issues with my speech, but I'm much more halting than Dr. Stultz Pressley over here, who is fabulous and just talks like nobody's. I'm just always so like, you have a radio voice. This is amazing. And I'm just desperately trying to keep a sentence sometimes going until the period without my brain just going, stop, you're tired, but I mean, most people, if I approach them and with something on me that's like, ooh, I have autism, they're not going to realize that I have a PhD. They're not going to they're not going to understand that it's like, I was the chair of a department. I am very, very competent. I have some struggles that I have worked, 46 years of my life to overcome. And I've had a lot of help from parents and friends and my wife and all of those things to really understand connection. And, but most people won't know, but otherwise. And so it's such a changing face. And I think that's one of the reasons why they try to make sure that they're not diagnosing their own character.
Right.
And I think that's really, really good. So yeah, I mean, I will say that when I watch Dear Evan Hansen, I weep every single time. When you're a musical theater people, sometimes you're used to weeping during these shows,
right,
because it's
of
like
course.
At the very beginning of my journey towards musical theater, every show I saw, I just weep because I just loved it so much. And now I'm a little bit more jaded and I don't do that all the time.
Same.
In the last 5-10 years, I've cried at 2 shows, Dear Evan Hansen and Come From Away.
Oh yeah.
Those 2.
Yep.
And Dear Evan Hansen, my wife does not cry at. My wife wanted to be the special guest today to talk about how she has major problems with this character. But I do connect. I do connect with the character in a very, very different way. And part of it is because, we go through that idea of waving through a window, right?
Right.
Like, oh. And that connected with the social media I think this is a very, very big thing that we're just now starting to talk about.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about this surge in neurodiversity, and I'm like, I think we're seeing it more and more because of social media.
Right.
Because they're either not, we're asking people to perform themselves online every day.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to do that very well. Like I am desperately just trying to perform myself every day in my normal life.
Just
and now
get by.
I have to do something else, and being like, and the thing is, I mean, your kids will tell you if you don't have social media, you are disconnected.
That's very true.
From
That's
everything.
very true.
I mean, my wife and I talk about the girls and how I don't want them to have social media until,
of course.
But at a certain point, we will hamper their ability to be part of the social structure.
That's very true.
If we don't allow them to have it. So then what kind of it's a big conversation that everybody kind of needs to have.
It is a big conversation. And, I know even from the times when I have deactivated my Facebook profile.
Yeah, I know.
There's think of how many things you miss out on. Like, I didn't know that was happening. I didn't know they were doing this. I didn't get that invitation because it all comes through social media. Mm-hmm. So once you unplug from that matrix, you're really unplugging from so much of life and so much of those points of connection. Like you're mentioning.
Also people looking to that digital performance of self and commenting on it, right?
Yeah.
And the thing about it is that it's like, especially in the concept of neurodivergence, it's like if you're not performing it well, you're getting mocked, right? If you're not performing it at all, you're getting mocked for not having it.
Right.
So it's a catch-22, I think, for a lot of folks. And I think social media creates a lot of stress. It creates way more stress in my life.
Absolutely.
And I'm 46 years old and I do not get into the fray. Kristin will tell you, I rarely post anything but cute pictures of my children. And that's locked, y'all.
Right.
Like that's so their grandparents can see from a different state. But it's, I'm not somebody who's good at self-promotion and I think this is a wonderful moment for us to grapple with it. But it's seen in a very different way than by the different generations. I think that the generations beneath us, this really resonates with them because I think they are exhausted by the need to create that digital performance of self and how that contributes to the lying and the response to human tragedy, how different that is, and their need to feel connected to what's going on, and I might miss it, like how exhausting that all can be.
Right.
I think our generation and above has a very different feeling of it.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, to your point about neurodivergence and not wanting to paint with too broad a brush because everybody's different. Another musical that grapples with this is 2014's Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime.
Is that a musical? Is it considered a musical? I thought it was a straight play.
I feel like it has music. Let me look.
I don't remember it having music.
It's based on a novel. Music. It does have music and choreography. Yeah.
Oh, where?
Yeah. But the only reason I thought of that in relationship to this was because I remember when I was speaking about that show, when it toured through, when it was touring through the theaters that I work with, their PR team was very emphatic that I not give a specific label to the situation that the main character was in. Like they wanted to not diagnose him.
Yeah.
And so that same theme is recurring here with Deborah and Hansen, and they premiere on Broadway 2 years removed from each other. So maybe this is just a new thing that we'll be seeing.
But it's the same in Next to Normal too. They don't really come
That's
out
exactly
with
right. That's exactly right.
It's almost safer to do that I think, because the moment you put a label on it, some people are like, oh, well, that's not me, or that is me, or not.
That's right.
Like, you can't, I think it's wise. So.
Yes, agreed. 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 But nevertheless, those would be two very interesting characters to compare, or two very interesting musicals to look at. If you're looking to do a compare and contrast, those would be two good ones. And maybe one day we'll do that, but not today. At any rate, so Stephen Levinson, after these months of conversation, goes off and he comes up with a script. And, then the development is ongoing, but they finally have something ready to go in the summer of 2015. And they premiere Dear Evan Hansen at the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. And it is very warmly received, and the expectation is it'll go to Broadway. Now, Tracey, you have a unique perspective on this period in Dear Evan Hansen's development, so tell us about that.
It's we were my company was based in Washington, D.C., and we Palace Theater Collective, which is no longer around, but it was developing another new musical called Codename Cynthia, at the same time as Dear Evan Hansen. And, we're in a 20-seat theater and they are Arena Stage, Tony Award winning Arena Stage. So obviously we're not in competition, and I didn't even think about a lot of it at all, except for the fact that all of a sudden we started doing really, really well. And we were like, this is weird. And we started realizing from the amount of people who were coming in to talk to me was that a lot of, folks in the generation above me who patronize these theaters and give, and they're wonderful patrons for the arts, were going to see Dear Evan Hansen and did not have the warm reception to it that the younger generation did. And I think that Arena Stage figured out very quickly that they needed to kind of pivot to the younger generations and get them in to kind of figure out who their base was, which made me, who's doing a World War II spy musical, go, how do I get those ones that are left out over there? So that's what I spent this summer of 2015 doing.
That's amazing.
Was trying to kind of bring that in, and we had a great summer. But the Arena Stage production was with Ben Platt. He came to DC, and we knew it was going to Broadway, and it's a lot of fun.
Interesting.
We actually did better in the Broadway World Awards, which I know is not, it's a thing. We did better than Dear Evan Hansen, or I think they were number one and we were number two, which makes perfect sense. And but it was a summer, I'll say that.
That's awesome. That is a very unique perspective. As expected, though, Dear Evan Hansen does go on to New York. It first premieres at Second Stage off Broadway in spring of 2016. Second Stage is also, I believe, where they had produced Dogfight, so it makes sense that they would go back there. And then it opens on Broadway December 4th, 2016 at the Music Box Theater, which is a small theater. I mean, it's one of the smaller houses. I think it's like 900 seats. It was owned by Irving Berlin.
Yeah, and it's got lots of like poles everywhere.
Yes,
like, that
does.
You can always get stuck behind. It's a very awkward space in some ways.
It's awkward and small. That's very true. A couple of points about it. It was capitalized at $9.5 million, which in the grand scheme of things is not as much as a lot of modern musicals. Even still, that's just 12.6, the modern equivalent of 12.6 million. So
that's pretty low.
That's very low.
Think of
it's got 8 characters.
8 characters.
So that's a small cast.
Costuming is it's just kind of off the rack in some ways.
Yeah.
And the entire set is TV screens. So you pay for the digital footprint of what all those screens are doing, and for somebody to put it together in QLab and all these other programs, and away you go. I mean, it is not, it's powerful as far as the visual aspect of it, but it is not expensive.
Right.
In any way, shape, or form.
And to your point about those TV screens, that's where we get into this. Social media is the ninth character, because if you've seen the show, then you know this. If you were about to see the show, you're going to realize that pretty quickly, that the backdrop has social media posts. And that's where you see all of these viral posts happening that are referenced in the show. And for a time, the images on those photos were just stock photos of, whomever, probably AI generated whatever they call things generated by AI. I don't know. But in fact, because they had some very savvy social media minds behind this show, they started implementing the use of the hashtag "you will be found."
Yeah.
And so fans of the show, they call them fansons appropriately. Fansons would post themselves singing or whatever with the hashtag "you will be found," and then some of those users, fans of the show, ended up being part of the show.
Yeah,
that's really groundbreaking. I mean, we're starting to see more and more use, first, of technology, which, again, Curious Incident is a great example of that. There's a lot of technology in use there, but this social media idea, I will not say Dear Evan Hansen was the first, but it was among the first. I don't say anything is the first, because I can always be proven wrong. But it was kind of at the forefront of using that in a major way, making it a major part of the show, to the point that Stacey Mendich, producer of the show, was calling it the ninth character in the show. It plays an enormous role. And the way that they were able to pull in their fans, include their fans in the show. Again, we're looking for connection. And suddenly you're making these people who love the show feel connected to it in an even richer way. That's really powerful.
Well, and they're doing it in real time.
Yes.
Like sometimes but they're doing it in real time. When I saw it, right before the pandemic shut everything down. So March of 2020, I saw it on Broadway. And, they were running, before the show started, they were running things by people who were sitting in the audience, like next to me. You could get it on the screen.
Yeah. So, and I know how exciting that is. My son, who is 12, we just went to I'm a Kentucky Wildcat. So I was at the Sweet 16 in Indianapolis. And my son saw that if you post a picture on your Twitter or Instagram, it could get on the Jumbotron. And my 12-year-old says, post me. I mean, he doesn't care about pictures or he doesn't have social media, but daggone it, he wanted to be on that Jumbotron. And he said, I didn't have a picture of him at the show, at the game by himself. I had several with him and his brother, but not just him. And he goes, well, just take one of just me, because he wanted it to be him front and center. And by Jiminy Joe, he got up there and he was elated. I mean, like, it made his night to be. We ended up losing the game, but all was not lost because he was on the Jumbotron. So that's really powerful. It's really powerful.
But that's how they gain connection now.
And that's the point. There you go.
And that is, anyway.
Yeah.
I think that their point of, when it comes to Dear Evan Hansen, I think a lot of people talk about neurodivergence, and I think we need to be talking more about connection. And I think that the writers, everybody's trying to push us that way. But because the conversation around neurodivergence is so big, it like the first thing that happened was everybody went over here. And really, I think if you stick with the idea of what are people doing to get this connection, and why do they feel like they need it? Everybody has their own struggles. Everybody doesn't feel like they're connected at some point. Evan has the character himself has very unique struggles that maybe not everybody has, but everybody feels like that sometimes. It's another reason why I think that it's like you can't diagnose a character there.
Right. Absolutely. So the show, of course, is a big hit. It's nominated for 9 Tony Awards. It wins 6, including obviously Best Musical, Best Book, Best Score, Best Performance for a Leading Actor for Ben Platt, Best Performance for a Featured Actress for Rachel Bay Jones, and Best Orchestrations.
Who was very good.
Yes, she was great.
In a very difficult part.
She was great.
Very difficult part. So she plays great. Evan's mom.
Yeah. And interestingly, the orchestrations were done by Alex Lacamoire, which is a name you may know from, among many other things, Hamilton.
Yeah.
Dear Evan Hansen, as we alluded to, closed in 2022, September of 2022. Really
shortly after it reopened.
Shortly after it reopened, it was a casualty of the pandemic. It ran for almost 1,700 performances. Obviously, is continuing to tour around the country, but it's an enormously important work that is incredibly popular, particularly with younger audiences. I was telling Tracey, my nieces are not huge musical theater fans. I mean, I've taken them to theater throughout their lives. They've gone with our family. We go a good bit, but this is one that they both really dig into, and so I do think, yeah.
I mean, teaching, when it came out, it was, I had like that childish prejudice against it, because I was like, oh gosh, they all love it. That's their world.
That's me with Hamilton. That's how I was with Hamilton.
And it was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. That always makes me nervous. But, there is, again, I said to a student this week, I was like, it may not resonate with you, but you have to ask yourself, look around, who is it resonating with and why? And what does that tell us about our culture, and how does that make us get more engaged in what is happening around us? So I think that's important.
Yeah. And this was one of those years where there were two, I believe, I'm confirming as I speak. Yeah, this is one of those years when there were two shows that were really in a dogfight for Best Musical, Dear Evan Hansen and Come From Away.
Yeah.
It reminded me of the Lion King ragtime year, 1997-98, that season, when it was like, who's it going to be? And they're very different shows doing very different things. And it's so interesting to see how it all plays out. But they both ended up having very similar runs. They closed right around the same time and continue to tour and are beloved by their own unique audiences.
And have their own audiences. I think
it.
That is the point.
That's the key. That's the key.
And it's something that we talk about more and more with the more recent stuff, is the fact that our country is
fractured.
We are not homogenous when it comes to American audiences. We differ by region. We differ by age. And I'm coming to find that our differences by generation are the ones that really seem to change who likes what. Anyway, it's very weird.
And that's a perfect example. That is a perfect example of that. And even, I mean, Ragtime Lion King could be the same way.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the same dichotomy at play there. So at any rate, those are conversations for another day. This episode is now concluded. That'll do it for this episode of the Dr. Broadway podcast. Tune in next time. We'll be talking about 2019's 10-time Tony Award winner, Moulin Rouge the musical, which I mentioned is super confusing because it didn't win the Best Musical Award until 2021, which is a complete mind-blowing thing for someone like me. But until then, you can connect with us via email at hello@drbroadway.com or on Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok at Dr. Bway Podcast.